Three, two, one. Welcome to the Lightforge. This is ADWCTA.
This is Merps, and today we have another guest. He is none other than the completer of the 110 challenge and #2 on the June leaderboards. Please welcome Isherwood. Thank you for coming on, Isher.
Howdy.
It's been a while since you've been on the Lightforge, right?
Yeah, I think it was right after the 110 challenge that I got on. It's been a little bit of a while.
That's like last year, actually, probably like around this time, maybe like a month or two before this.
Yeah, just about.
And since then, your channel has grown substantially. You've signed on with F2K. You've made partner as well. Congratulations on that.
Yeah, actually today I was just celebrating my 1 month of being a partner. So it was the 1 month mark for me. It's really exciting times.
Nice. It's nice to see people, coming a long way since then, and it is because of the Lightforge, right?
I do want to thank you guys. Like you guys having me on as the guest did really help out, and you guys just being supportive of kind of the small timers. I still think of myself as kind of one of those guys.
I mean, it's not like the consistent on the leaderboards every single month, or the 110 challenge. It's all the Lightforge promotion.
Well, no, yeah. But that was because of us, obviously.
Okay.
It all starts with us.
But yeah, if you guys haven't checked out Isherwood yet, when's your normal stream times?
10 a.m. Pacific to about 6 to 8 hours every day.
Okay, so there you have it. He's a very consistent and arena streamer. And we're gonna get to this first. Normally we'd have a guest on and we'd ask him all these questions about how to be good in the arena. But we're gonna start off not about how to be good in the arena, but maybe more about how Blizzard can be good in the arena by not doing everything they've been doing. Like literally, I just found out about this because I was preoccupied with some like algorithm making stuff, and so I hadn't been like tracking Arena HS closely. And Isher just brought this up to our attention like a half hour ago, maybe 15 minutes ago, that there was a post from Taro again, doing a statistical analysis and breaking down, what exactly is actually going on in the arena that Blizzard's not telling us. And as it turns out, Blizzard lied to us again. There's not really a different way to say it, like they exaggerated, but they use numbers. You can't exaggerate when you use numbers. At that point, you're just lying. Like if you say like it's gonna be big or small, you can exaggerate. But if you say it's gonna be 1 or 2, that's a number. And at that point, you're just lying. So why don't we, like Isher, why don't you tell us what Taro's post was about and what you told us and what's actually happening in the arena?
So I'm not a very mathematical person, so I have to kind of rely on people like Taro to tell me what's going on. What Taro seemed to find out is that Blizzard has changed the offering rates instead of 5% for some cards, upwards of 10% for some cards. And he used Mage as the specific class. He was showing, I think, that Polymorph had about a 10% change. The reason why this is a deal is because Blizzard specifically said they would be making kind of micro changes to around 1 to 5% for cards, but instead we've now seen that this is perhaps up to 10%. And so that they have just literally said, we're now going to be more honest with you. We're going to be more straightforward. Not completely, because they never said exactly what cards they would be changing in those 1 to 5.
Yeah, they were giving themselves wiggle room too. They were like, 1 to 5% on some cards somewhere.
They gave themselves wiggle room, but then they still were dishonest. They're like, we didn't give ourselves enough wiggle room. So there seems to be some percentage changes. I know, Rocky, you were looking at some of these things, and it doesn't seem to be just Mage. It seems to go beyond just that specific class.
Yeah, just the setup is the craziest part of it, right? Like they came out with a patch because Taro discovered that there was like a weapons buff. Like people figured out that there was like weapons buffs, warriors are getting better, like things were happening. And Blizzard's like, here's a patch, we'll put it in the patch notes, just like you guys asked for. And in the patch notes, it said all the things we expected it to say. And in addition to that, it said there will be 1 to 5% micro adjustments, which, Ixar had hinted at before. And we were like, all right, fine. So some cards are going to be micro adjusted up and down. And we were going to have a whole thing about how micro adjust would impact the arena, right? It's done for class balance. The incentives behind it were good. It just means we don't want to screw with too many things. And we don't want you to think about too many things. We're going to move cards just a tiny, tiny bit, like take all the good cards down, all the bad cards up for the for the good classes, and do the reverse for the bad classes, and we'll end up with like a 50% close to that win rate for average player. players, and everyone will be happy. And we're like, all right, we like information, but like whatever. And Taro's thing, after I read this, I like literally just went on HS Replay to like look at every single class and like all the top performing cards for it, just to see how deep the rabbit hole goes. This is what Blizzard actually did. All right, this is 15 minutes of research. This is not like they're trying to hide it, especially. Yeah. It's more like they're just incompetent about knowing what the hell they're actually doing with their own arena game. So the disclosure is 1 to 5%. Taro says 10% on Mage from like a post 2 days ago. I checked it again today, which has way more data. You know, obviously, because HS Replay keeps releasing new data, and we have more accurate data, much higher sample sizes. Mage and Rogue, like some of the good cards, not all the good cards. Like Taro made a point that Meteor didn't go down, which is true, which is crazy. But some of the good cards, like Polymorph, I found a couple of other examples I can't remember on the top of my head, but quite a number of Water Elemental, yeah. A lot of the Mage cards went down by about 10%, which is larger than 5%. It is double than 5%. At 5%...
Wow. 10 bigger than 5 confirmed here.
At 5%...
Never say ADWCTA can't do math, right?
Like, imagine you're looking at the tier list, right? And you're looking... And they have somehow done some kind of adjust, and Yeti should be 100, and like, it's now a 90... it's actually a 95, because we're using information Blizzard gave. That's kind of like a somewhat significant difference, right? If you're like, oh, whatever, Yeti's like a 98 instead of a 95, no one cares that much. Now, if you're saying, oh, Yeti should be a 110 instead of a 100, that's like a really big deal. That affects like about like I think half the decisions you'll make about the Yeti in your drafts. And this is for not just Mage, it's also for Rogue. Like, if backstabs are down, your abysses are down, all those things are down. 10%, again, not 5%, 10%. And even worse, this is not the biggest adjustment that's been made. So there's two more egregious things about this, all right? And I say egregious because it is egregious. One, Warrior. And you know I love Warrior, and I love the fact that they really love the Warrior, and they've just given the Warrior the weapon bonus. But Warrior good cards, and I include cards like Slam. This is not just a weapon bonus. This is already after factoring the weapon bonus. On top of that, starting in the middle of July, Warriors, the good cards, your Arcanite Reapers, your whatever the thing, Fool's Banes, your Gore Howls, your Slams, they all went up by somewhere between 20 and 25%.
Insane.
20 to 25%. That's 5 times the difference. Like, imagine if you were told you were going to get a salary, and then you got a fifth of your salary. Like, that's not the same. That's really not the same. It's actually very, very different from the same. And okay, I guess substantively, no one's really going to complain if Warriors got more of their better cards because they were such a crappy class. I'm sure they did this to purely help the arena flat balance, and I'm sure it's in some degree like working exactly as they wanted it to. But that's 20%. You can't say 5% and then do 20%. Saying 5% and doing 10% is bad enough. And then there's one class with 20%. That's just ridiculous.
Yeah. Here's the thing that's really the issue, right? Like, if you are making these changes, like, it could have gone 2 ways. Basically, they could have just made these changes and said, we're making dramatic changes, and I wouldn't like it, but, you know, they're being transparent, right? Or they could have just told us, you know, like, given us a lot more information, and I think we would have been happy as well. But they hid the information, you know, or sort of, you know, gave us a very blanket statement of 1 to 5% after saying they would be a lot more transparent. And then we find out that the numbers aren't correct. And that's just really frustrating. And
these are not just arbitrary numbers that aren't correct. They're literally numbers that Blizzard gave us, like, days before, like, the community figured it out. So it's like Blizzard's making a change. This is what Isher was talking about. This is the more concerning stuff. I would care way less, way, way, way less if Blizzard just came out and said, yeah, we're giving Rogue and Mage minus 10% and Warrior plus 20%. I'd be like, all right, you know, Mage and Rogue are good classes, Warrior's a bad class, fine, right? Like, instead, they're like, we're doing this. And then they go ahead and do it, and it's something totally different, and it just means that they have no idea what they're doing. And so whenever they try to do something, we don't even, it's going to come out different, right? So it's not even, so when Ixstar comes out and says, I think Arena should be like this, and I'm going to do this, what are we going to believe? We're not going to believe anything he says, not because we think he's a horrible person, but because he has no control over Blizzard. He doesn't know what they're actually doing with the game. And maybe he's telling them to do something with the game and they're not doing it, or maybe someone else is actually doing stuff with the game and they're just telling him the wrong information, or like maybe he scribbled the notes down wrong. I don't know, but there's like no trust here. There's no reason to trust them right now by this point.
It's gone. It's completely gone. Basically, what Blizzard patch notes from this point on for Arena are their patch notes with maybe a 20% margin of error. Like if they are even more, who knows at this point? Like they've now, like, we as a community have to figure out everything that Blizzard's doing, because they won't tell us, right? Or they'll maybe try to tell us and they'll just mess it up. It's one of those. They're either just they're making rules, then changing their mind really quickly and saying, oh, we're not even going to bother to tell because the community just doesn't warrant that response. Are there, I don't know, purposely lying to us?
No, I think they don't have their things together. They don't have their ducks in a row. They don't, like, they've been trying to like set it up and they've just been like failing at like different points. And sometimes they're slow about it. Sometimes they do things that don't make sense. But much more concerning is when they try to do something and then the different thing happens. Like, it's like if I'm sending a signal into my arm that says write something down and instead my arm punches myself in the face. That's a problem. You don't trust that guy. You do not want that guy anywhere near you, even if he's a super nice guy, because he is not in control. Because he is not in control of his body. That's what Blizzard is like right now. When it comes to the arena, at least. When it comes to the arena.
Okay. That's an interesting analogy you put out there.
This is how ridiculous the situation is. It's not like, you know, they purposefully said this. You know,
but I totally agree, and I think this is also just another unfortunate incident in a long sort of string of events that have not looked so great. You know, the lack of communication, and then when there is communication, there's fuzziness. There's been a lot of times where they've dropped the ball. They've also done some things that have not been as popular, or in our opinion, not as effective or elegant. It's nice that they are doing stuff with the arena. And I remember way back in January, we were just like, oh man, I hope they do stuff with the arena. And they are doing that, but
they're so bad at doing it. And
you have to go up to a certain standard here.
They're so bad at doing stuff. It's not even like they were bad at like knowing what to do, which is like one step, but like they'll eventually figure out what to do, we thought. But if they're actually also bad at doing what they want to do,
it kind of goes back to the point where I remember when, I mean, a lot of people didn't like the change, but when Arena shifted to standard, I didn't have so much of a problem with that. Like I liked standard Arena, but the thing is, it's very general. It's just a very, very, black and white shift, right? Mm-hmm. These cards are gone. That's it. Like that's a shift that Blizzard can make. Whenever they try to micromanage stuff, I lose the trust for them.
Especially if they're micromanaging stuff and not telling us. Like, thank God we have HS replay so that we can just like search up stats for like whatever and like figure out what they're actually doing. Otherwise, like, we wouldn't even know, right? It's micro adjust. Their whole point is like a total lack of responsibility, right? Like lack of accountability. You don't know if we've moved to 2% or 5% or none at all, so we're fine. But like, we do know, not when you move to 2% maybe, but we do know when you move to 20%. That kind of stands out because we have HS replay. We can gather our own stats, and we have been for a while now. Like as a HS replay on wherever they're getting their stats from, and it shows a clear line. You just click on the site and like look at the line. It just like, when the Ungoro bonus went away, it just like dipped, and then when the new patch came along, it like moved again, or it didn't move. Like, it's obvious Blizzard did something there. And again, when I say like 10% or 20% with these classes or whatever, that is just something I am totally estimating by just looking at the site. You can look on the site itself. These are not like stats that we have figured out. We don't have the stats. Blizzard has the stats. We're just looking at HS replay and looking at the stats there. And if we're wrong on any of this, feel free to correct us, Blizzard, or anyone else if we're wrong on part of it or all of it. I don't think there's any way we're wrong on all of it by this point. But like, it's just... I think it's very unlikely, okay, that Blizzard came out and meant to do this. Just so unlikely, because they actually put it in the patch notes. Like, they're not like evil in like, in some weird way of trying to destroy the arena, right? It's their product, right? They earn money from it. They're not trying to screw it up, but they are screwing it up. And
so when you talk about what you have listed here, Mage, Rogue, and Warrior, were there any changes to the other classes?
No, there were no changes to the other classes. And you know what's one of the other classes?
Paladin.
Paladin. And you know what we have known about Paladin since, like, basically when Angoro came out?
Pretty good.
It has the highest win rate on average across all, like, things that anybody's, like, tracked. It's always had the highest win rate. Even when we don't think it's the best class, it's had the highest win rate.
Surely Spectred Steed or Vinecleaver got some sort of a dip.
Well, Vinecleaver got more frequent.
More frequent.
More frequent.
Okay.
It went up because of the weapon buff. Remember?
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so we see more of them now.
Vinecleavers.
Yeah, that's what's happening.
Basically, look, when they came out with the patch notes and says everything will be micro adjusted, I think it would be a fair assumption to think like, oh, okay, so this is going to be automated, and we'll see this change just happen, right? Like I assume things would all happen at once, and this is another example where, like, now we see that they're going through the classes, not evenly. Who knows when they're going to get to the other classes, and it makes this shifting, unknown arena meta that I don't know. Like it's not just sort of the
and to be fair, I don't know if they have like not gotten to the other classes or if they got to the other classes and that's actually a 1 to 2% adjustment, and so we can't even like eyeball it, right? Like it's entirely possible they've done the other classes. The biggest problem that I'm seeing is if Warrior gets 20% and what Druid and Warlock get basically nothing. I guess that's okay. I think that at least Druid is fine. But much more concerning to me is the Paladin. Clearly, there's an issue with the Paladin, especially if you're adjusting this based on like most players, right? These adjustments are not for the top. It's Blizzard, right? Doing a wide adjustment.
Yeah.
Like you can't penalize Rogue and Mage who have win rates that are below the top, and not penalize Paladin too, even if you don't penalize Paladin extra. Right? I think there's an argument to penalize Paladin extra.
Yeah, so especially if they're hurting cards like Polymorph, which is a really helpful card against the Paladin, right? Then all of a sudden you're doing this adjustment that's pushing Paladin further because of Spectred Steed. If you're moving more Polymorphs, you're buffing Paladin by nerfing the other classes, of course. The win rate that's already has that difference.
Yeah. So I mean, right now I have no other suggestions to make about class balance except pick Paladin. Blizzard seems to like Paladin. Pick Paladin because Blizzard likes Paladin. Warrior is okay now because Blizzard is taking care of Warrior. Other classes that are bad, like if you think Druid is bad, don't pick Druid. Warlock is almost universally, I think, regarded as like kind of a lower class. Don't pick Warlock. We are forced to play Shaman today, but I don't want to pick Shaman. Like, I don't know.
You don't want to pick Shaman, yeah.
I'm like, fine. But like I looked over, I was like, oh man, I hope Shaman got adjusted up. Nope.
I Volcanoed a Bittertide Hydra today. That is the one really satisfying thing you can do as a Shaman.
All right, that's our way to victory. Pick all the Volcanoes and hope for Bittertide Hydras.
Yep.
But yeah, this is just an extremely frustrating realization because, like I said, look, Blizzard can come out with a solution that I am not a big fan of, which I am not a big fan of micro adjustments, right? Like just as an idea. But you know what? It's not my game. If they want to implement it, that's fine. It's just this, right? Like the speed at which they implement it and not tell us the amount that they implement, and it's just way over 5%. I don't know. Like I have no idea what to think. It's just another example of me just like losing more faith in Blizzard.
Because there's a difference here, right? Like if you move something 1 to 2% and you don't tell us, you're like, look, you really should just not concern yourself with 1 to 2%. If you move Warrior cards up by 20 to 25% and you don't tell us, it's like anybody who is serious about the game knows that a 25% offering rate is a huge difference. It's not like a tiny bit of difference. That's a huge difference.
It's like at that point, it's the difference between picking that class over another class, right? And that's what we want to know, right? We want to know, should we be picking Warrior or Druid or something like that?
Yeah, and it affects things such as like how good are weapon buffs in Warrior, right? Like how good are weapon destruction cards in other classes. It affects everything. There's a whole chain. Like there's a line between when information is so micro that it's not worth it to like, like if you're adjusting 100 cards by 1 to 2%, And okay, it's kind of a hassle to tell everybody, and no one's really going to filter that except for me. And so maybe Blizzard doesn't care to do all that work for just me, and Isher and Merps and like maybe like 20 other people. That's fine, but at 20%, a good amount of people care at that point. Like at that point, anyone serious about the arena cares, and they may not go through it themselves, but they want someone to be able to go through it and figure it out. And so at that point, Blizzard just like tell us stuff. But again, right? I don't think this is intentional. I think they meant 1 to 5%, and something just got like screwed up somewhere.
It doesn't make sense for it to be intentional.
Yeah,
it really doesn't.
Yeah, I mean they can't possibly have thought that they were going to get away with this for more than like a couple weeks. Like they know HS replay is out there,
right? And there's no benefit to quote getting away with it either. Yeah.
No. Okay. Moving away from why Blizzard screwed up and sucks and why we're angry at Blizzard, let's and before we get to why Isher is awesome and how to actually play in Un'Goro, which we will get to, and we will spend a good amount of time on that. I want to ask how you guys feel about micro adjust as a concept, right? Like if we're moving into this new era where Blizzard is trying to adjust things, apparently up to 25% on these individual cards. Per class, which we assume also includes neutral cards, right? Like maybe Primordial Drake is much more frequently seen in Warrior than in, I was going to say Paladin, but apparently Paladin special. Mage. Maybe that's also a thing, right? But like these micro adjusts across all the cards in Hearthstone Arena to create class balance so that you don't really have to think about which class you pick, right? I think the end goal for Blizzard is so that you can pick almost any class and then have like maybe a 5% variance in win rates, not like the current, like, I don't know, 15% variance in win rates for casual, like for average players. So Isher, why don't you start us off? What do you think about this as a concept? Assuming Blizzard implemented it near perfectly, like implementation-wise, not what's going on now.
I don't think it's a good idea. I think if Blizzard wants to do changes to Arena, they need to make more like general changes. I think that the change from Wild to Standard was a good one. It's kind of simple. I don't trust them with more complex ideas. Not really. I mean, just it's hard work, right? And I mean, obviously, Arena just seems to be kind of a tertiary, like a third game mode to them, and I just don't think that they like. I think they keep on trying to kind of try, and they're never really going to be able to put in the effort to make those adjustments correct. So don't bother in the first place, because you just might screw up things more. And if you are going to change it, let us know about it.
That hit me kind of hard when you said it was the third game mode.
Yeah, there's Standard, there's Wild, and then there's Arena.
Oh, good. Oh, well, so you didn't even know. I mean, so maybe this is going to hit you hard.
A lot of people play Tavern Brawl, though.
The second game mode is actually Tavern Brawl. Yeah, it's not Wild, because they make a new Tavern Brawl every week. They're putting a lot of effort into Tavern Brawl. The amount of effort spent on Tavern Brawl is way more than the Arena, and it's just hitting me. And I guess so we are actually playing the fourth, not even the third now that you brought Wild into it. We are now playing the fourth most...
That silence was one of the worst silences I've ever experienced.
I'm just
sad. It was truly like, hello, darkness, my friend kind of silence, you know?
You know, we were the second of two. Like, it was just... I didn't realize that meant we were always going to be last. I thought that meant we were second, but...
I mean, maybe it's time for a Tavern Brawl tier list.
It would serve more people, and it would, I don't know, it seems like the place for development. Like if I were an investor, I would be investing in Tavern Brawl right now, not Arena. You know, I would buy Tavern Brawl stock.
You definitely
Wild
should.
stock.
All right. So I'm gonna give my opinion now.
Yeah, go. Take us a little bit away from this darkness, or bring us deeper. Your call.
Oh, I'm definitely gonna maybe it's a lateral move.
Okay.
It doesn't have to, yeah. Anyways, look, I agree with Isher that it's a bad idea, and I think for two reasons. So, or rather, it's bad for I think two groups of players. So, number one, I think it's bad for just sort of the general players. You can put beginners in there as well. Maybe this is just me, but I think a lot of players do not like the fact that, look, if they never find out about this at all, I think they'll be fine. But I think people in general do not like to be playing something and then later find out, wait, I wasn't playing the game I thought I was playing, right? I think that's just a overall bad feeling to get. And like I said, it's absolutely fine for people to never, if they didn't know about this and they never find out, I think that's fine. But I think there's a group of people who, when they find out, you know, they like walk out into the sun for the first time. There's like, wow, this is nothing like what I thought it was. And I think that kind of sucks. Like it definitely feels bad, right? And we don't want people feeling bad about the game. So that's point number one. But I think point number two, this is really important. This makes the end game really hard and also really not enjoyable. Because what happens is, what is the learning curve in Hearthstone, right? You go in as a brand new player. Your first step is to like, oh, let's figure out how to play. There's mana crystals, yada, yada. You learn the cards, you learn about trades, you learn about tempo and all that stuff. And what used to be the last step? The last step used to be like, you know, reads, really sort of like eking out like small values here and there. It was still playing the game pretty much. And I think it was not only an acceptable end game, it was an enjoyable end game for people like, you know, if you were a 7.5 average player trying to get to like an Isherwood level player, right? But what happens now? Like if you are sort of, you know, like at an Isherwood level and you're trying to push, like, let's say two people are competing against each other at the very top level. So we have like Shady and Isher, right? Like two very good players. What is the last step for them to min-max? It's not to, you know, like play the game, sort of keep on drafting. It's to memorize these numbers.
And it's not the 10% and 20%, because it's not like all Warriors cards got 20% and all my major rogue cards minus 10%. It's like a random selection of what Blizzard chooses. Like, for example, Meteor didn't get nerfed. It didn't get lower adjustment rates. Polymorph did. Fireball was fine. Fireball did not get minus 10% offering rates. Like, I don't know, Volcanic Potion did, though. Like, figure it out.
So if, for example, Isherwood and Shady were like, oh, like we want to compete with each other for the leaderboard. We know, you know, like we've been in top 10 consistently. They want to have an edge over the other person. This is the end game grind for like the top tier level players, right? If Isherwood wants an edge over Shady, which he should, and he's a very competitive player, what does he have to do? He has to go on HS replay and learn all of these numbers because they will help him out. Added together, he has to memorize them. They will help him out. And by the way, he has to check about once every 2 weeks or so, right?
Whenever Blizzard updates, yeah.
Whenever Blizzard updates. I have no idea. I'm guessing it's like a week or two. Who knows? I don't want to guess. But he can't just do it and then be like, okay, now I know them for good.
You will never know the meta.
Every 2 weeks or every month, Isher has to go to HS replay, crunch all of these numbers, and say, okay, now I have a slight advantage over Shady. Or if Shady does it, Isherwood has to do it in order to keep up, right? This is now the end game. It's not about playing anymore. And I know, look, this will not apply to 99.99999% of players. But your top level players, who are your streamers, who are, you know, the people really going after it, they are anchors in the community, right? They keep the interest going, and you need devoted end game players to sort of like galvanize and, you know, energize the base as well. And I hate this because it just, how can you take the end game and make it into this? Like, how can you make that last few percentage points, which is everything, because Hearthstone is a very RNG game. How can you make the last few percentage points of your you know, win percentage be about going on HS replay, figuring it out because Blizzard won't give it to you, and then having to recheck every 2 weeks or so?
No. Like, I think your problem is you're thinking about it from a logical perspective of like what you want to do. Think about it from a constructed player's perspective on how to get good at constructed play. That is the end game. It is knowing people's decks. It is going on tournaments, trying to figure out the lists. It is, you know, part of it is about crafting the decks or whatever, but also that 1 to 2 percentage points. It is about exactly like knowing what percent chance my opponent's this deck has this particular card or that particular card. It is about what are the chances my opponent has that particular thing. That's what the mindset is. And what you have is a bunch of primarily, like it's, you know, we know Team 5, we know who's there. It's a bunch of primarily constructed players trying to do things to a limited format. And they may play limited, you know, I'm not saying none of them play limited. Ixar clearly plays limited, Mike Denies plays limited, I've seen Ben Brode play Arena and do pretty well. But that's not what they mostly do, and that's not how they think about the game. And so this is how they're balancing the game. The proposal came to them. I don't know if they thought about it or if some of their engineers said, hey, we have an excellent solution about, you know, like using computers and objective stuff and making these micro adjustments. And they're like, problem solved. So, yeah.
To kind of add a point to that, like the kind of high level players, right? The high level players are your really good advertisers, right? We're Blizzard's free advertisement. That's fine. But in Constructed, that whole 1 to 2 percentage point thing, there's always that incentive, right? Constructed has those tournaments, those cash pools. There's a tangible reward to kind of push towards. In Arena, there's not that. And so like every time that they do these things where it makes the game more of really a nuisance to play and to try to get better with, they're decentivizing the really, really good players and the people that want to share the game, right? They make the game less interesting to play. And so like they're kind of pushing the top end players, I think, further and further away. And I guess Arena's always been the casual mode, and so I guess they're approaching their goal.
It's not even okay. Let me bring this from another perspective, which is, what if you are just a regular person and want to improve on the Arena, and you go and you watch anybody stream, right? It could be the most popular stream, Crips, it could be a random Arena stream like ours, and you see what people are actually doing to play. And what are they doing? They are reciting lists of tables, consulting a document or like a website or something. You know, I'm sure the Lightforge will start listing these rates as soon as we figure them out precisely. Because this is now part of the Arena offering rate stuff, right? This is part of the rules of the Arena. Blizzard won't tell you, we're going to have to tell you. And you're going to see us consulting these like giant charts of like which cards are less seen or whatever. And they're going to be like, wow, that's a stupid way to play the game. I guess I'll just play casually or not at all, right? Like, Constructed seems a little more interesting because you see the Constructed players play. They don't have to do that, at least, right? They may be like wondering what my opponent's decks are, but that's at least a little more interesting than looking at one chart, right? They're at least trying to like read what their opponents may have done. You don't do that in the Arena. Like, not at least, maybe eventually you'll get somewhat of a read of what their big picture general plan is, but for the most part, you're playing the odds. This is like much more like poker than Constructed is. You're playing the odds, and when Blizzard purposefully obscures the odds and makes it artificially difficult to figure out and artificially difficult to memorize, you're going to get gameplay that involves me sitting here being like, okay, so their chances of board clear is, you know, maybe 1.5 in the deck, but then they altered it recently, so now it's like 1.8, and then and if you're watching that, what are you thinking? One, this guy's like such a huge dork. Why would he do that? And two,
they've always
and two, I'm not going to do that. Like, that's stupid. I'm not going to do that. And if that's how this game is played, I'm not going to get that good at it. I'm already, you know, like a good Hearthstone player in my mind without doing that. I'm just going to go play Constructed or some other card game.
Yeah. No, that's a real shit. Because, okay, if I'm thinking from Blizzard's perspective, why didn't they tell us the numbers, right? Like, why don't they, like, when they just
because it's going to be so complicated that they can't tell us.
Right. It's got to be so complicated, and I'm sure they didn't want to put it out because I'm sure they don't want people to agonize over the numbers, right? It's like, you know, like they don't want people to agonize over the numbers. They don't want people to, like, you know, basically have the list that they provide and then have it next to them while they play. But by not releasing the numbers, you kind of force people to go somewhere else, get the numbers, and still have, like,
especially when the numbers are this big, when it's 20%, right. Like, fine, if it's 1 to 2%, you know, maybe it's not worth the effort. But look, it's a very simple premise in competitive game design. Very simple. Whether you're designing a video game, a tabletop game, like, I don't know, your own family version of how to play playing cards, right? Whatever. It's a very, very, very simple rule. If your rules of the game are too complicated to explain, you should have new rules. That's what Blizzard has done with the arena. Blizzard has created rules that are too complicated for them to explain to their players. Not just too complicated for explanation in-game, but too complicated, period, that they're not even telling us, and they don't even know what the rules are, and they don't really care, right? Ixar came out, and the patch notes came out and said 1 to 5%, and it's 10%, 20%, maybe 25%. And you know what Blizzard's dev team is like? Hey, we thought it was 1 to 5%. They're not going to go and say, oh yeah, we knew it was 25%, because they probably didn't. This is just how Arena is run right now. This is like it's not even like, it's like the people who are supposed to be in control are not. Whether the people who are in control are good at their jobs or not is not even relevant at this point. They're just not in control of what's actually happening to the arena. Anyway, micro adjustments, generally bad, especially if it's on this large scale. Potentially okay if it's on like a very tiny scale. But let's say you don't care about game design. Let's say you're just like, well, I'm an arena player, right? Tell me how to live in this world. Tell me how to improve in a world of micro adjustments, right? Like, we know that it's here. Assuming Blizzard doesn't go back and not do this, maybe they'll start telling us what the real numbers are. Maybe they still won't, and we'll just have to go on HS replay. But I want to actually just know how to do better in here. And you know what? I don't want to memorize the chart. Right? Like, let's say, obviously the best way to do this is to memorize the chart, but let's say you don't want to memorize the chart. There's a large percentage of people who don't want to memorize the chart, and maybe they don't want to be number 2 on the leaderboard like Isher. Maybe they're happy just being like an infinite player or a soft infinite player, and they don't really necessarily need the chart, and there's a lot of more fun ways to improve in the arena than memorizing the chart. So here's what you do. What you do is, you pick the class, because Blizzard's end goal, which means they're going to get closer and closer to this as they get better and better at their whole micro-adjust thing, is to make all the classes vaguely the same for what we assume to be average players. So the class you want to pick as a good player is the class that, 1, you're personally better at than you think other people are, and 2, the classes that require more skill, where the skill creates a larger divergence than other classes. We have always known, and statistics have always backed up, that higher win rate players perform worse with Priest than regular players relative to how much better they would perform as almost any other class. So unless you were like just really good with Priest and bad with other classes, you would just not take Priest. Paladin has also a fairly low amount of skill improvement percentage. And on the other hand, Rogue has always had a very large skill area. And you can take potentially classes that you think other people just suck at, right? Like, I would play a lot of Druid, because statistically, I know Druids have been a pretty bad win rate class for a long time, even though I have played Druid as a middling or even like, you know, above average class. Because Druid has the same concepts as Mage and Rogue, which is you have that hero power initiative always, you have more control over the game, even if the class overall is bad. So when all the other people play Druid, it lowers the averages, Blizzard buffs some certain cards, and then you get the advantage, right? So that's how you would pick your class when it comes to at least when it comes to class selection. After that, there's no good way to play, which was our whole problem with it.
I mean, this is all assuming that Blizzard meets its goal, right, of really evening the classes out. So everything that ADWCTA says comes with
the future,
right. Like faith that Blizzard will get all of this right, you know. Quote right.
Well, roughly right. They don't have to be perfect with it, but they have to get within a certain percentage points for it to like work the way I'm saying it works.
Right. So
and that is their goal.
Were to pick right now, would you recommend this?
Oh, just Paladin.
Yeah, right now just pick Paladin. Okay. Paladin's definitely good.
Yep. I just want to make sure, you know, the listeners out there knew.
Yeah, everyone should pick Paladin.
Yeah, we're all good on that one.
So the advice that ADWCTA gave about picking like Druid and picking like that's for
hypothetical in the future.
The hypothetical future, yes. Mm-hmm.
Evaluating the supposed micro adjustment regime that Blizzard is in the process of implementing and will probably try to implement in the future.
And we're weeks away from an expansion where they are going to unload a card set that they don't know how it's going to affect the arena. So this is all going to be the whole micro adjustments is going to go all up in the air again in just a matter of weeks.
There This is what happens.
Fantastic.
This is what happens when smart people who don't really know how to play the arena, but can figure out like a way to program something that learns from the game and, you know, adjust cards up and down, and then proposes it to people who should know the arena but don't know the arena well enough, and also don't know the technology well at all, and probably can't really explain what it's actually doing, and everybody then thinks it's a good idea, but no one knows what's actually going on. This is the result. This is exactly where we are right now, where no one knows what's going on in the arena, because that's how Blizzard's process of how to make these changes has been set up. Because, like, look, I mean, we all know, right? Ben Bro's not sitting there programming this algorithm that's adjusting the cards, right? Like, Ixar's not doing that. They're just, like, get a PowerPoint presentation on how this supposedly works, ask a few questions, and then sign off on it, or, you know, back to the drawing board. And then this is just not a way to balance a competitive game. This is just, it's a god-awful way to accomplish that goal. And we're sad because we're competitive players, and if you're listening to this, you're probably at least somewhat competitive, and you want to improve, and you want the game to be better. But I guess if you're totally casual, maybe you don't care. Maybe you just want to have the end game of looking at a screen and being like, oh yeah, I picked my favorite hero. Oh, I picked my favorite cards. Okay, I'm going to do as good as anyone else. I don't know.
All right. Well, I am appropriately tilted and sad at the same time now.
Well, let's go back to Isherwood. Isher, you used to be number 2 in on the leaderboards in June before the micro adjustment regime fully kicked in. And I know we're kind of in a new micro adjustment era, but so far at least it doesn't seem like Blizzard's touched things too much, except for like certain mage and rogue cards and certain warrior cards. So I think roughly speaking, we're still sort of in the same meta we were in June. Is there any kind of advice that you would like to give, or how did you reach number 2? It's like that's quite a feat, right? Like me and Merps have never been to number 2. We were like number 9 at our best, and it gets harder and harder every single month to become higher in the leaderboard as more and more people try it. So what would you advise our listeners on how to play the arena? What classes to pick?
Well, I mean, I think there's two kind of tiers to the advice. I think there's getting on the leaderboard, like how do you get there, and then there's the top 10. I think getting on the leaderboard, there's so much advice, you know. There's take your time with plays, play the good classes. There's kind of the thing that we actually talk kind of quite a bit about. Getting to the top 10. I mean, it's you know, it's min-maxing, playing your very best, and really, I feel it comes down to it's a bit of luck also. And I think a lot of that comes down to is you have 30 arena runs, and some people, like, I think I got lucky. I think I high rolled a lot of paladins and a lot of rogues in that. And I'm not trying to, like, you know, detract. Like, I think I'm really happy with 2, and I'm proud to be number 2. But like, there's some months where, you know, you're gonna hit a streak of paladins or rogues when they're good. You know, back when Warlock was at its peak, if you could high roll a bunch of Warlocks, that was going to help you out a lot. So I mean, I don't think, you know, I'm not going to be like making claims or like, you know, I'm like one of, like, you know, like number 2 and I've got a firm hold on it, because there's a lot of randomness in arena, right? And I think the biggest randomness when it comes to your positioning on the leaderboard is the class selection and what you get in those 30, in your streak of 30 classes. Some people also going to have a better chance. Like, I play a lot of arena. I play probably 100 arena runs a month, sometimes more. And so that gives me a larger best of 30 it gives me a larger grouping to look for my best of 30, right? So I have a better chance of finding those streaks of getting a bunch of paladins, right? I was pretty lucky. I think my best 30 runs were in like my first 32 of last month. So I kind of I hit that streak right away, and it worked out for me. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely a bit of skill to get there. I'm not going to take that away from myself, but I think there's a fair share of luck. I think when it comes to, you know, talking about how good people are on the leaderboard, I think consistency shows a lot. People just kind of showing up on the leaderboard multiple times. I mean, big shout outs to Crip, this is his second time being number 1.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I couldn't quite beat him out, but that just shows you like the tier of a player that Crip is at. He's like having 2 number 1 positions. it just shows how strong of a player he is, because that's the consistency, right? Now he did like it might be a little bit of it, you know, you're definitely skilled if you hit number 1, but it might be a little bit of luck in the month between, you know, you and number 2, right? Or you and number 5, but hitting it twice, I mean, really shows, I think, the higher level of skill there. Right. I was lucky enough to get number 1 on a leaderboard, but it wasn't on the NA. I got number 1 on Asia a few months ago.
Right. So I wanted to ask, because, you know, you have had 2 extremely high places, right? Last month, number 2 NA, and a few months ago, number 1 in Asia. And I think you're a good candidate to ask this question, just because you've consistently placed on quite a few leaderboards. You know, you've kind of gone for every single month. Have you noticed something different between, you know, the number 2 and the number 1 finish and your other months where you, quote, you know, just end up being like in the teens or the 20s or maybe even the 30s? Because you've been on the leaderboard basically every single month. And I'm just wondering, like, does it just come down to luck, you know, like between the top 20 or top 30 finishes and your top, you know, number 2 and number 1? Or did you sort of figure out the meta during those 2 magical runs?
You know, it's a bit of a few things. I think with me personally, like, I'm a person of kind of streakiness. Whenever I get a really good start, I tend to do very well for that month. I get my 30 runs out of the way right away, and I kind of tend to roll with a good streak. And I'm a player that hits his fair share of tilt. Like there's days where, like, you know, if I get like a 3, a 1, and a 3, right, that will carry over, right? So it's like, if I can just kind of like avoid those early on and get like a real if I can get my first run of the month being 12, like that's going to be a good month, because like I've at least got that to go to. Like if I hit like a 4 win on the next day, it's like, okay, I've got that 12 backing me up. So I mean, it's a little bit of psychology. But generally what I feel is the more fun I'm having, the better I do. It's because, like, I'm you know, I think I'm a little bit less on tilt. Of course, winning probably has the biggest factor with me having to do having fun on their arena. But really, I don't really have any big differences. I think probably the biggest difference between, you know, position and the 70s versus the number 2 is probably for me the class selection, right? Just getting a better set of, generally almost in any meta, it's rogue, paladin, or mage, right? Occasionally you'll have warlock or maybe even priest kind of like peek its head up in the top 3 and say hello there for a little bit. But I think when I get like you know, I can, like, I've hit one of the leaderboards at least every single month, so I can know I'm a leaderboard player rather consistently. But the really high points, it's really just I think it's just really kind of hitting a little bit more of that really strong class selection.
So during your answer, you said winning was the most important factor. Spoken like a true ADWCTA, man. I was just like, ooh, all right. No, but so when you were number 1 in Asia, like, would you also consider that a high roll? Like, did you get a lot of, I forgot what class is like amazing back then. It's like months ago.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
It's been months, and like I tend to just kind of like play my arena and then move on to the next arena. I don't send that too much reflection, so I actually can't really say what the strongest classes were. I don't think it was long ago. I think Paladin and Rogue were probably my primary classes then. I think I high rolled with those. So I think it was I'd have to kind of go back and double check, but I think it was just kind of hitting some of those stronger classes. Really, this is a great meta for me, because I really kind of, the Paladin playstyle just kind of sits well with me. The play a card, buff the card the next turn, win the game. It's a playstyle that's always kind of, that is simple for me. It's a simple playstyle. I really like it, and it can be explained in, like, you know, this 3 points: play card, buff card, then win. And it kind of works for me. I really enjoy playing Paladin right now.
You know, when you mentioned the tilt factor, I think that's really significant. Like, if you look at a lot of the players that have appeared very high on the leaderboards, these are players that, you know, number 1, have a lot of runs, and you see a lot of popular streamers on there as well. And I think, you know, one of the sort of benefits of being a streamer is, you know, you've kind of been through more I guess, tension, right? Because, you know, you're streaming a lot of stuff. For example, everyone knows that Crypt gets a lot of trolls, you know, who and a lot of snipers, and he just sort of brushes it off, right? You look at someone like Shady Bunny, who is just extremely cool throughout, right? Like very, very composed throughout. And you said that you've kind of acquired this skill as well. And I think that's like that, in my mind, might be one of the most important factors. Just like you're playing at least 30 runs, and some of them play like 100 runs, right? And just keeping a cool head and not getting tilted, and like recognizing that sometimes things will go wrong, like that just might be the difference between you placing like top 10 versus you just placing top 30. But yeah, I think that's pretty good. And you said before that like there's a lot of tips that you can give basically for just getting onto the leaderboard. Like I basically want you to, because you try to weasel your way out of that. I'm not gonna let you do that. That's not what we do here. I need to
drilling down into Isherwood secrets. I know you want to keep those secrets, but let's share at least a couple.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, it's kind of the general tips for Infinite. Maximize the rope, right? Use your time as just use all the time that Hearthstone gives you. I think this is one of the biggest keys, because the more time you just give yourself as much time to consider all the alternative plays, and make sure you reconsider your alternative plays when you draw a new card. Like I don't always follow my own advice on this. Sometimes I'm playing more casually. I'm playing on a different server where I'm not making leaderboard push, and I'll play quickly. But like when you're making leaderboard pushes, just giving yourself as much time to consider all of your different options, you'll oftentimes surprise yourself with a play that you find that's a little bit more on the creative side. I think that is a big one there. Besides that, I mean, very, very basically I know people that are like, oh, I'm going to push for the leaderboard. And then they're like, oh, but I'm not going to pick Paladin or Row. Just pick the class. Like,
wait, if you're do this?
No. Like, I think people tell me it's like, oh, I don't want to pick these really strong classes, but I want to go for the leaderboard. Well, that's fine. Just make one a priority over another, because you're going to be upset one of these ways, because your average is going to dip, right? When you go for when you don't go for the really strong classes.
I'm sorry. This is blowing my mind. It's like saying, it's like, oh, dude, it's like, I'm going to win the street race, but I want to win it in a Prius.
Yeah.
Like what?
And that's the thing, is right. Like there's a sort of pride with winning it in the Prius, but the thing is, you're not like you can finish there, but you're not going to finish high. And I think that's the thing, is like, don't get frustrated with maybe like you're going to get a lower average. Like, when you have an objective, like when you have multiple objectives, like some people don't like the approach of playing the strongest classes. When I first started Hearthstone, the first 12-win deck I got was a Priest, like because I played Priest. I was that player when I played Hearthstone. That's basically all I did. And then, like, hey, like I never played Dr. Boom, and I still have that I was like, I've never played Dr. Boom and Constructed, and I was just that kind of person, right? I enjoyed the maybe the hipster life of Hearthstone. But if you have that objective, and you also have the objective of, oh, I want to do well in arena, know for yourself personally what's the more important objective, and really have fun with the game. I think that's something that I have to remind myself a lot. This is like, have fun with the game, have fun with Hearthstone, pick the objective that will achieve that goal for yourself. And for that goal, for a lot of people, I include myself, it's sometimes going to be, I want to do the best position I can get on the leaderboard. And that means we're not going to be playing Warlock or Druid or Shaman for a while.
So have fun with the game. You haven't gone full ADWCTA issue. This is good. Your transformation hasn't been complete yet. I'm very glad. No, I think that's really good advice. And some of this advice might seem just simple, but it's a lot of these simple things that I think not too much differentiates between the top players. So yeah,
I think advice, like giving people advice in Hearthstone, like there's a lot of different kind of general pointers you can get, but I think for like really good advice, you kind of want to know where the person is at. Like giving advice to a 2-win average player is a lot different than giving advice to a 6-win average player.
Right.
So like specifically for advice with the leaderboard, I mean, if you want to make the leaderboard, first advice is pick the strongest classes. Like that's clear if that's your primary goal. And then really I think just giving yourself as much time with the turns is a big one. And then practice. If you don't make the leaderboard in the first month you try, and that's your objective, then you've just got a whole month of experience, and your chances are you've learned a lot and that you'll have a better chance on the next month.
All right. So going into the meta a little bit, I just want to end with one question about a specific thing, because you came in a few weeks ago when I was struggling a little bit with the meta, and we co-op to a 12-win Paladin run. You know, this is during June when you're like, yeah, I just pick a lot of Paladins. It was really good. And so I have a very Paladin-specific question that I want to run by you. Just have something concrete that listeners can take away from. And it's a situation that I'm presented with not frequently, but sometimes as a Paladin, and I'm not always sure how to deal with it. So the situation is you're off the board, you're not dying or anything like that, but you are definitely off the board. You have nothing on the board, and your opponent has like a little bit of stuff on the board. It's kind of an even game, but he's managed to keep you off the board, right? And it's like turn 8 and after. At what point do you just say screw it and play your Spike-Rich Steed on a minion from your hand? Or like on a hero power minion, or like, and at what point are you still like saying, "Oh, I'm gonna wait until he gives me one minion like left"? Like, let's assume. So the basic case, the easiest case is if you have, for example, a Vine Cleaver. Obviously, you play the Vine Cleaver first because it's almost impossible for your opponent to clean you off the board. But assuming that you think it's kind of like, I don't know, maybe 50-50, maybe a little iffy that you'll ever be able to get a board. At what point do you just take the value of the Spike-Rich Steed without the initiative? And at what points do you kind of wait for it? I know it's like a super general kind of question, but take a stab at what considerations go on in your head when you're trying to make that choice.
I think so the first thing that starts to come to my mind is the question I want to ask is what class you're playing against. And this is where I think this is the important thing. Okay. You want to look at the class that you're playing against, and you want to kind of figure out two things, right? Like, you didn't say exactly what the life total is, but let's say your life total is like 15, right? I think this changes versus something like a rogue, right? If you're playing against a rogue, their reach isn't going to be as generally, I feel, as direct to your face as, say, a mage, right? Mage can just throw pyroblasts, and like that's a whole new deal. But like stopping, let's say the rogue has 4 damage on the board. I think stopping that 4 damage for a turn can be pretty helpful. And Spike-Rich Steed is a very, very sticky minion, right? And if the rogue only has 4 damage, then you can just put that hero power down, throw that Spike-Rich Steed, and then just pray that there's no sap, right? So I think it's going to vary a little bit, like depending on like how reach heavy the classes are. I think priest, like when you're playing against priests, you can dip your life down, quite a bit lower versus a priest generally, because you're going to feel that they just generally don't have the reach. And there's different things to factor, right? How long these classes have been holding cards, right? Because if you're playing against a priest and they've been holding 1 card for ages, and like let's say it's like a top like 1 card versus 1 card, you don't want to give them the Spike-Rich Steed for mind control. You got to try to kind of like play the game out a little bit longer and maybe play the top deck game. So really, like I think the best way to answer that question is, first like look at the class that you're playing against and like start and think about how they've been holding their cards, what your reads are, and just what they, of course, they can potentially like top deck against you, and kind of evaluate that all in a pool together. Like, how important is stopping the damage for these few turns? If it's a shaman with a 3 minion split on the board, like that's a little bit more dangerous, right? Because of bloodlust. So like you just might need to stop a potential lethal. And then versus let's say the mage. Well, the mage, you're kind of always screwed because they can throw reach at you, or they're going to polymorph you. That's the problem with playing against mages. Like a mage potentially always has the answer if they have cards in their hand. So I think it changes from game to game, and I think probably the biggest factor you want to look at is maybe just the class that you're playing against there, and what your survivability is against it.
Yep.
That's a great answer. All right, so keeping that in mind, let's you want to get to the question from the GOAT? We'll wrap this up with question from the GOAT, card good bad, and then we'll talk about Shaman as we try to get some tips from Isher before we embark on our sad Shaman journey in the coop after this. So let's do a question from the GOAT. What have you got for us, Merps?
All right, question from the GOAT is submitted through Twitter. That's how we're going to do these from now on. It saves me from thinking of questions of my own. But this week's question actually comes from Dreads, who is a fellow Hearthstone arena streamer. Dreads asks, which card from Ungoro feels the worst to lose to other than Flappy Bird since its offering rate has been nerfed?
Oh,
so,
predicting the next 50% Blizzard lows. Isher, go.
I know it. Primordial Glyph.
Really? I was going to go in a totally different direction after the Ordeal.
Yeah.
You're with me. It's clearly one of the other primordial cards. There's two other primordial cards that I would actually have in mind. But tell me, why Glyph? Why Glyph?
If that gets played on turn 2 and you lose to it later, like, can you, like, if a Glyph gets played on turn 2, right? What can you do? Just like, I want to know, like, how? I'm going to go like a little bit crip on here. It's like, you can't do anything. You're just, you can't play around the magnitude of offers. You've got too much things. You've got hard removal, you've got AoE, you've got large removal and AoE bundled together in Meteor because Blizzard decided why not. Like, it's such a frustrating card because the read on it becomes very, very difficult. Or it just comes to the late game and you're in this top deck war, right? Where you have a board, right? And you say Flame Strike, the offering rate is down 50%. Don't need to worry about Flame Strike, right? Like this, I shouldn't be playing around Flame Strike. And then they top deck Primordial Glyph and you just say, and then they get to choose. And you see those 3 cards for a second and you know what one of those cards are. And it's such a sinking feeling. It's just terrible because you know, it's like, I played around these offering rates because they have Discover in there. The offering rate changes don't matter as much as they're supposed to. Like, because Flame Strike can just pop up through Glyph. So if you don't nerf Glyph also, or if you don't nerf how often Flame Strike shows up in Glyph, you're not.
Please don't make that suggestion to Blizzard. Please.
We're
gonna cut that out. We're gonna edit that out because Blizzard's gonna look at that and be like, "Oh, that's perfect."
Oh yeah, they're gonna start micromanaging Discovers. Yeah, I can see it.
You remember the story of Discover, right? Discover came out as a mechanic, and even in Constructed, no one really knew what the odds were in all of them because Blizzard never told them. And then someone was like, "Hey, by the way, we're getting more class cards than I would expect." And then someone went and actually just like, I think they literally just kept discovering stuff and tracking it, like writing it down until they figured out what the answer was. Like way back in the day when Discover first came out. So please, let's not do individual card offering rate increases and decreases.
First up, Stonehill Defender and Paladin. Like, all the legendaries are gone from it.
The micro adjusts, please no. Okay, so that's a good thing with Glyph. I do see that's definitely like one of the problems, and there's a similar but like to a lesser extent an issue with the Cabalist Courier, I think it is, the 3-mana one that draws cards. Cabal Courier, which they put in some non-mage cards too, which technically makes it worse, but also there's a lot more trash in there for you to filter through, whereas the Glyph is almost always good and gives you your mana back. But yeah, Cabalist Tome, similar vein, but 5 mana is gone, like, period, right? So not exactly the same, although you do get all 3 cards that you're offered rather than having to pick one. But yeah, okay, I could definitely see that as a source of unplayable frustration, and I think for Blizzard, they just don't want you to play around that card. Like, that's not. I don't think I think you're reaching for something that is unobtainable because it's designed to be unobtainable. It's not like, oh, if you memorized all of this stuff, you should be able to do it a decent percentage of times. I think it's kind of just a shot in the dark. Because you have to play around everything at the same odds. So Merps, why don't you talk about the card that I think both of us were thinking about?
Drake,
Primordial Drake.
Primordial Drake. The thing about Primordial Drake. Okay, so what was one of the criteria that like made them get rid of Flame Strike and Abyssal Enforcer? It just starts off with how often you ask. It's like, man, I really hope they don't have X, right?
And if they have X, I'm just dead.
That happened for Flame Strike, and that happened for Abyssal Enforcer as well. And you knew that, you knew the percentages, but it was sometimes too punishing not to play into it, right? You couldn't afford the tempo loss. with Primordial Drake, it's even, I would say it's even worse, just because you quote only get 2 damage, but it's a 4/8 taunt, man.
The taunt, man.
The 4/8 taunt just stops everything. Like, and also it kills off the 2 poisonous, like the 2 poisonous things in the meta, right? It kills off snails and
Emperor
wasps.
Cobra, best poisonous minion.
Oh, true. Emperor Cobra, so good. But yeah, like the amount of times I've said, okay, if they have a Primordial Drake, I guess I just lose here. Or the amount of times, even when I try to prepare for it, I really can't without it being like a 3-for-1 or a 4-for-1. It's so frustrating. And the flip side to that is it is a turn 8 play, and you could say, all right, turn 8 play should be powerful, but
Flame Strike's a turn 7 play. And just comparing how easy it is to play around Flame Strike, if it is turn 7 or turn 8 to play around Flame Strike, you need one thing 5 health or above. One thing 5 health or above means half the 4-drops and most of the cards higher than a 4-drop. Just one thing. That's all you need. And Blizzard was like, oh no, that's too tilting. Primordial Drake, you need something 6 health or above. And that has to be able to then hit into the Drake with like something else that's 3 health or above. And you've already lost all of your 2 damage things. And you don't get a chance to attack their face afterwards. You have to kill this Drake off the board afterwards. It's not even it's not even remotely close. Not even a remotely close comparison between how much like this one card just wins you the game. Now, the flip side of Drake is that you can't play him when you're up on the board as efficiently, right? That's why it's like just an unbalanced card, not a totally game-breaking card, necessarily. But when it comes to playstyles, this one card completely destroys an entire playstyle that's probably one of like 3 or 4 playstyles that you can get in the arena, just like off the board. And it's not fun to play. It's not fun to play around. It's less frequently able to be played around than the cards that they have banned. Like, there's way less ways to play around Primordial Drake than Flappy Bird, than Flame Strike, than even Abyssal Enforcer, which is the hardest one to play around of the 3 that were limited to 50%.
Right.
And it's still here, and it's in every class, and you see it in like almost every game, and it's dominating the meta still, and they're just not doing anything about it.
It's extremely frustrating. Although I understand, like I didn't think of Primordial Glyph, but because the question is sort of what is the most
tilting, right? Is what they're going for. Like
what feels really bad, because as we know, like that is very important to Blizzard, and I think like ADWCTA, you and I don't think we don't get as tilted by something like Primordial Glyph, but I can see how it would tilt a lot of people, right? It's like they don't, because with Primordial Glyph, they always have it, right? It's like it's always in your hand, and they have it, and then they play it. And a lot of people get tilted by the fact that it's like they didn't have this thing, they found it, and then they played it, right? And that feels really, really, really bad.
But it's arena. So you find all the things when you make your deck. Like, I don't think it's any more tilting, in that sense than...
But a lot of people think after the draft, you're done finding things. Like, drafting is for finding.
There's a whole mechanic. It's called Discover. It's for finding things.
I know, but people don't... Like I said, I can understand how people feel bad.
Yeah, all right. All right. So you have the 3 levels of feel bad. You have the people who just feel bad for like illogical reasons. You have people like Isher who try too hard, like harder than we try, who feel bad for not being able to like actually counter it because you can't. And then you have people like us who are like, well, we don't try as hard as Isher, and we're more logical than the people who, you know, like just feel bad for the same reason they should feel bad when your opponent like has a card. Okay, no, I get it. I think that makes a good point. And you know what, like if Blizzard's like reducing these kinds of cards, like that's fine, but like tell us, right? Like this is like if Flappy Bird goes down, like I said, right, I don't like the fact that it went down, but fine, you're telling us, we'll move on with it, right? Like
make a successful Reddit post, because apparently that's the one way to get Blizzard's attention.
I think you'll find a lot of support in Crip. You should probably send him something on Skype or a DM and just be like, "Hey, you should really do this. You have a lot of popularity on Reddit. People listen to you. You have already made a video about it. So we can just like really make this happen."
Oh, yeah.
All right. So, question from the GOAT is brought to you by our patrons. Our patrons at patreon.com/grinninggoat or /grinninggoat. I don't know why is it backslash. That's not how websites work. That is how what keeps the light on here at the Lightforge. And in July, our top patrons are 4P, Afro Ninja, TB, Ingo, Talon, and Ugbog and Zaruvi. Thank you guys so much for your support. We really appreciate it, and it really helps us at the Lightforge and with our YouTube channel because unlike our Twitch stream, which has like actual subs, these other parts don't have easy ways to keep things going. So thank you guys so much. Yeah, that's our Patreon, patreon.com/grinninggoat. Let's move on to close this out with Card Good Bad and tips for Shaman. Card Good Bad, you picked this, Isher, and I thought this is an excellent card to talk about. We have not talked about it yet here on the Lightforge in extreme detail, or I don't think we've talked about it. Maybe I made a mistake and we did, but I want to talk about it again. It is Molten Blade at 112 on the tier list, so one of the worst rated weapons, but still a weapon and still very highly rated. Especially now that Warrior is a totally legitimate class, and I would rank it even like middling, you know, like maybe. You're going to see this card, you're going to have a chance to draft this card a lot. What made you select this card as a discussion topic, Isher?
So I think there's two things that I think are interesting about this card right now. First is with the weapon increase bonus. I think you kind of want to consider all weapons in Warrior again because you're just more likely to see Warrior weapons, right? You're more likely to see your Wind Axes, your Arcanite Reapers. So like part of me is like I really liked Molten Blade. It was a really fun pick, but the few times I've drafted Warrior recently, I've been at that boundary of like I sometimes end up with maybe some extra weapons, right? Too many weapons. So Molten Blade, I think kind of like I feel like it maybe deserves a little bit of a reevaluation when it comes to just, hey, other weapons are showing up, so do I really need to pick that card because I'll get a weapon? And then the other thing is I think like there's new weapons, right? And I think like whenever there's new weapons in other classes, because Molten Blade can turn into other class cards, like how interesting of a card is it because like Vine Cleaver exists, right? Like how good is that potentially if you find that in Warrior? And there's some cards are gone, like you don't have a great chance of finding, like if you keep it in your starting hand, you're not going to find a 2-drop weapon a lot, or at least not one you want to play. You're not like Argent Lance is gone, but you can find the Shaman, like you can find Shaman weapons. So like the Shaman weapons are pretty good there. Like Fiery War Axe, it can just change into a Warrior card. So I think it's a card that, like, if you've talked about it before, I think it's an interesting card to talk about each expansion because you get new weapons in there, and it's all of a sudden like if the next set all of a sudden gets a lot of like 2-mana weapons, right, through all the classes, and then Molten Blade has a better chance of showing up, like if you can keep it in your starting hand, where Warrior might like have a struggle having 2 drops. Like I think it kind of becomes an interesting card there. So on top of it, what is in the other classes also, like, hey, there's a lot more just weapons around. So do you need the Molten Blade, and maybe what's some of the interesting things that can happen with Molten Blade and other class cards?
Yeah, and just so you know, I just looked at the Molten Blade thing. It looks like it is getting that. It is getting some of the bonus, probably around 20% that we're talking about, in addition to the normal weapon increase. So compared to where you think how many Molten Blades you're getting, you're actually getting double that. So it is showing up in a lot of drafts. And we had talked about just last Lightforge, when Gorehow was our card good bad, about just how much you've seen weapons now, especially in the Warrior, and how you get very consistent amount of weapons. So I think this is good to bring up the one weapon that you may be actually like very questionable about taking, right? Like there's no, like, obviously like Tentacles for arms you're not taking, but Molten Blade is the other like good weapon that maybe you don't want to take. So I think it is, in a normal draft, don't have enough weapons that you would be passing this one up just because it is the worst weapon and, you know, subject to too much RNG. In a more weapons-heavy draft, I have oftentimes passed up Molten Blade. Like, it's a 112 on our tier list, but I have taken, like, cards below 100 over it when I'm starting to overweapon. Because this is not even something that you can, like, get rid of, you know? Like, if you have 2 Fire War Axes, you can start planning it, right? When your weapons start stacking up, you really need to start planning stuff. And this actually fights against that.
Yeah.
So the worse your hand, the clunkier your hand ends up being because of weapons, or your deck ends up being because of weapons, the worse a Molten Blade is in it, even relative to other weapons that lose value as you get like more weapons, like Fire War Axe or like N'Zoth's First Mate. So I think this is definitely like in a draft, it's a danger area. And if you're just drafting Warrior and you're sensing that the weapons may be like enough, like if you have 6 weapons, that's enough. That's more than enough. If you have like 4 weapons, all right, you know, your Molten Blade may have its normal value. But if you're seeing yourself over weapon, and maybe you want to err on the side of over weaponing than under weaponing, but this card definitely starts dropping in value much harder than other cards, other weapons.
Yeah, I agree. I've also done the same thing past Molten Blade, and you know, I agree with like the current rating and the value of Molten Blade, but man, it has frustrated me so many times when it's like turn 6 and it's a Vine Cleaver, and then I'm just like next turn I'm like, all right, just be something decent, and it turns into a Molten Blade. First of all, Molten Blade should not be able to turn into Molten Blade. All right.
Hey, Molten Blade's a weapon.
I know it is, which is really unfortunate. That just feels so bad, right? And then afterwards it turns into like a small, you're just it's so frustrating. But
I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I've used Molten Blade as Molten Blade before. Like sometimes you're just like, I really need this one damage.
Yeah, I've needed that ping, and sometimes I have used it. I'm just like, all right, you're a boar in which I have to take damage. Okay.
I was like, yeah, this is not a boar, this is way worse than a boar.
Yeah, well, you're a boar that you're turning yourself into a boar for a turn.
You're half a rogue hero power.
Be the boar, all right? But, man, it is still a good card. You can tell the hesitation in my voice.
Okay, and let's wrap this up with Class Talk Shaman. I have had crappy experiences with Shaman. Merps has had crappy experiences with Shaman. We have lowered Shaman on the class tier list back down to like the bad classes, although we currently have it above Warlock and Warrior. And this is before we knew about the micro adjustments and how it's actually working. So I think Warrior is actually going up again, but maybe not Warlock. And so the question is, how bad is Shaman? Is it like actually going down? Is it like, how much worse is it than like Priest and Druid? And is it as good as Warlock? Or like, and then how do you play Shaman even in order to do good? We had focused on, when we were dropping Shaman, on like how it's split into 2, right? You have like the Volcano thing where you need to be off the board, like really off the board, and you get a lot of value out of it. And then you have the buff thing that's going on with the Flame Tongue Totem and all of that. And at least Shaman had like an identity before the Ungoro bonus half went away, where you just Volcano. You were a control. Aggro Shaman did not work. You were just control. And now Aggro Shaman still kind of doesn't work, but Control Shaman's also not as good, and you're in this weird middle zone, and we were kind of talking about that. But why don't you lead us off with what your views are on how good Shaman is, and then how would you play Shaman if you had any success with Shaman? Did you do any Shaman runs in your leaderboard run?
I might have been forced into it, but generally I don't think so. Like Shaman is a class, like Shaman would probably be like I'd probably have to be picking like Warrior and Druid last month to pick a Shaman. Like it's not necessarily that Shaman's like the 3rd worst class. It's just that because I don't like the class very much, I'm not as good with the class as I should be. So Shaman.
So this also begs the question: who is good with Shaman?
Some people that like Shaman. I mean, like I like Warlock a lot, so like I mean, I feel like I'm a good Warlock player, and I'll play Warlock when I get the opportunity to. And so there's people that enjoy Shaman for whatever crazy reason. They like rolling totems. They like the RNG.
Have you guys been watching Hafu lately? Because I'm thinking about it. Like Shady's not a Shaman like player. I'm trying to like think of an actual Shaman player in the current meta.
Right, but I know she. like I've been watching some of her runs because she's had a competition with a Maz Amnesiac. Obviously, she's not picking Shaman.
Right. Right.
So
okay, so no one's playing Shaman, Isher, to answer your question. Nobody who averages like none of the Twitch streamers, the Twitch partnered streamers are playing a ton of Shaman that we know of.
Anyways,
yeah.
So I mean, I think Shaman had kind of a moment to shine, and I think like the place to really go with Shaman is I don't know. I think the elemental synergies were really like you had some high swings you could get with elemental synergies in Shaman, and I think that's the class that and Mage probably was hurt the most by kind of that the dip in elemental offering rate that we see with the dip in on Goro cards. But I think Shaman kind of like it needed that more than Mage needed it, right? Mage has this insane card pool going back to the beginning to where it can I can just rely on any of these old cards. I think like the elementals I think like definitely gave the Shaman a little bit of a boost, made it a little bit more interesting to play. Like when you could get Servant of Kalamos into Kalamos, like there you go. Like there's Shaman at a very insane level. But I played a Shaman today, and it was just like it was kind of awkward. Like people know about Volcano, right? It's a card that people like. If you want to fall behind to like, if you want to get your Volcano to have value, right? You want to have cards to play after it. So, but it's so easy to make a read on it, right? So people will also kind of start like they'll because they have a foothold on the board, they can hold that board against you, but they can also start preserving cards. So like I feel like Volcano, while still a very strong card, like I just like I see when my opponents just know when I have it, right? And they'll kind of adjust to it. And I kind of like I lost a game today where I got a good Volcano play, but then they just re-got the initiative, and then I just couldn't quite get back up because overload was just 2 mana too much.
Right.
So it's got some interesting tools, and I really like the elemental synergy that Shaman had. But like
used to have that.
Yeah, I mean it
used to be so consistent. Like just like anytime you wanted to play an elemental, you had probably played an elemental the turn before.
It's there. Like I'm hoping that Shaman has some good weapons in the next expansion, because then like that'll probably help it a lot with weapons getting a bonus. But yeah, right now like I haven't been playing it too much, and when I have been playing it, I've been playing it as a more casual class. So I'll generally go for those elemental upsides and just kind of see if I can land them. And
what's the success rate of you think like landing the elemental synergies in Shaman? I think it's still pretty high, right?
It's still, I mean, one of the drafts I've drafted I think like 3 Shamans in the since the start of the month maybe, and like one of them just had Kalamos in the draft. So I was just like, I don't even need to discover it. I've got it. And we're just doing just have a kind of a baby Abyssal Enforcer that works here. So yeah, that was good. But yeah, I think it's like if you see a Servant of Kalamos early on in a Shaman, I think you go for it because the upside is just so strong there. But it's
I'm tempted to go for it if I see like Blaze Caller, Servant of Kalamos, the Tovir. Like I'm tempted if I see anything that's using an elemental, maybe not the Lizard. I'm tempted to go for it with Shaman. Yeah.
I mean because it doesn't act like it's not an elemental itself. So
right.
It's just a little bit more. It's not going to activate your other cards. Yeah.
Yeah, just because it's like, what else are you doing with the Shaman? My last 3 Shaman decks had an average of 3 Volcanoes in it. Like an average of 3 Volcanoes in each deck. And they did not do very well. And there was a certain point where I was like, I really should have taken just like a minion over a Volcano. Because in theory, like your Volcano should stack better, right? Like after your first Volcano, your next Volcano is going to trigger much more easily because who's playing around the 3rd Volcano. But in reality, they either like start really conserving cards, or they do what you're saying, which is you don't even get the first Volcano off. Like your first Volcano just like is a hard removal, and your second Volcano kills 2 small things, and your third Volcano, the entire time I'm just like, these Volcanoes suck. I don't even have the board, so they should be really good, but like I'd rather have, I don't know, like not just hexes, but like even like polymorphs, even like assassinates, like any day over these Volcanoes.
Yeah.
Yep.
You also mentioned that like Shaman used to have this kind of, you know, there used to be aggro Shaman, and I can't find Bloodlust. I can't find the board activators in Shaman anymore. Like when the drafts, like there used to be, so you had Bloodlust, you had the Murloc one a while back. You had some of like Flame Tongue totems even, right? Can really help out a board. And I'm just not like, I don't just feel like I haven't seen any of those in recent drafts. So I feel like it's really hard to push for an aggro Shaman. You have the ways of split, right? I've been seeing, like, you know, the split cards. You get the Murloc totem, and then you get like Call on the finishers. Like there's ways of splitting, but like I feel like I just haven't been seeing a lot of the activators, right? The ways to activate those boards consistently in drafts. So I'm not pushing for that direction. I'm just generally like, I see a Servant of Kalamos, I draft it, and then kind of hope for the upside.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's a good sort of summary of the Shaman. And I also see this sentiment sort of being shared a lot. I see it in the chat sort of right now as well, where a common response is like, but Shaman can't be that bad because Shaman has good cards, right? It's like, oh, it has very highly rated cards. And we've seen that time and time again. And I'll just present to you this. If you looked at sort of the rankings of these cards and the tier list throughout the history of Hearthstone, who should be the #1 class throughout all of history? It should be the Priest. The Priest has had like extremely high value cards, which have like top tier lists, and not just like really good top end cards. Like it has a lot of good top end cards, right? Like throughout like many metas. It's just not about the quality of the cards. It's how they fit together, right? It's how they fit together, and it's how they fit. The class fits in the meta as well. And Shaman has always had this problem in which, yes, they have independently powerful spells, but man, it's never gotten away from the RNG curse, right? Where your draft has to go well. You have to draw well. You don't have a ping, and you have RNG totems. And a lot of your spells, it's like it gives a range, right? Like from Lightning Storm to back when we were... Remember Crackle, guys?
Oh,
remember Crackle?
Oh god, I'm so happy that card is not in the game anymore.
Oh my gosh. The amount of times Crackle would determine games was so frustrating.
8 damage for your opponent, 3 damage for you.
It was always like that. But look, Crackle is out, but still Shamans they just don't have the consistency of a lot of classes, right? And if you are an infinite player, consistency is very attractive for you. And man, it is really frustrating playing as Shaman and also facing Shaman as well, just because you never know what can happen.
They always roll the spell totem. Oh, yeah. Every single time. I've seen it.
Or the 3 taunt totems in a row to 9 lethal. That happened to us. Remember, ADWCTA?
Yes.
3 taunt totems in a row, and then he beat us because he rolled 3 taunt totems in a row. That's Shaman for you, really.
The one thing that I will say in Shaman's favor is that I know we keep talking about how awkward it is for Shaman to do things, and you know, how RNG it is based or whatever, but at least casual players are doing okay with Shaman these days. Like, its win rate was never terribly low, and since the changes that have happened in June, when the Ungoro bonus was reduced, which reduced Volcano but also reduced elementals, and it all seemed bad, but on the other hand it had the weapons increase, right, which increased the good Shaman weapons, and the old good Shaman cards all got a slight bump. And it seems like overall it's been a positive effect on the win rate of like average players. So like there's probably something going on with the Shamans, and it's not like, oh, Volcanoes are not as good anymore or anything. Volcanoes win rates up, like Hex's win rates up, like Flame Tongue's win rates, everything's win rate is up on Shamans kind of across the board since then. So if you're us, you're like, oh, what's going on with Shaman? If you're Blizzard, you're like, Shaman's doing amazing right now. Let's like nerf it a little. But just like 4% on Volcano and 2% on Hex, because that's how we feel. So I don't know what's going on right now with Shaman. We're gonna have to play it, and I think maybe the best strategy right now, besides like the whole elemental thing, is just to pick good cards and hope for the best, because it's Shaman at this point. Like, you don't, there's no strategy really, right? Like, There's no big
No,
picture
there's no
strategy. It's
There's
just
no big
like
picture strategy.
you got to go mid range, right? Like you got to go mid range. You don't have enough for the control anymore, and you don't have enough to push aggro in this still slight kind of anti aggro meta. So
Right. And you hope to get independently strong cards that also have some upside, right?
Yep.
So you pick all of your fire enemies, and also it's an elemental now too.
Mm-hmm.
What a great thing! Yeah, you pick your flame tongues because they're always good, and you just like you said, you hope for the best.
Yep. All right, so that's Shaman. If you have a class with, I mean, it's always a good plan if you have a class with good individual cards, but it doesn't quite come together to just go mid range and try to pick good cards, right? Like that's always a decent plan, if not great. And we always want a great plan, so it kind of sucks if, like, for me at least, because I'm a big plan person, for me to just like go like, all right, I'm settling for a decent plan. But that's Shaman at this point, and I think that's the way you're supposed to play it.
Hey, a reminder that Jade Spirit is now an elemental, so shoot for those synergies.
Jade Shaman making a comeback, but yeah, Blizzard, part of the update, it's Jade Spirit, it's Mana Geode, and one more card.
There were a few.
Oh, there were a few. Okay, I know that legendary card, the legendary Shaman card too. Helizios also elemental now.
Genie, but that's wild.
No.
Oh,
yeah.
Genie of Zephyrs, yes, also an elemental.
Yeah, so a few more cards got an elemental label added to it too in the most recent update, which doesn't really affect Arena too much, but just keep an eye out for it if you're drafting. So that's it from us at the Lightforge. Isher, if you guys are just tuning in or skip to the end for some reason, Isherwood available at twitch.tv/A_Isherwood.
It's me.
Arena streamer number 2 in A in the month of June, number 1 in Asia a few months before that. Yeah, anything else you want to tell us, Isher?
No, just thanks for having me on. I hope everybody enjoyed the show. You know, I know we spent a bit of time kind of just kind of shaking our heads over Blizzard's lack of communication, but you know, it's something I've been talking about a little bit on stream recently, and we'll be talking about it for I'm sure the months ahead. And you know, I'm hoping that, you know, maybe at this next expansion we'll see an improvement. But for now, I guess we just, you know, looking forward with Arena, we just kind of got to figure out the information on our own, and you know, good players got to kind of do the extra work. I guess Blizzard isn't going to be helping us too much out with that, but thanks everybody for watching and checking me out. I hope you guys all check me out at twitch.tv/A_Isherwood. I stream just about every single day, mostly arenas, so I hope to see you all there sometime.
Yeah, and if you want to see our co-op, it's on our YouTube channel, the Grinning YouTube channel, which also has links to all of Isher stuff. It's from a couple weeks back we put it up, and it's a 12-win Paladin. And you get a lot of good Paladin tips, and we all know what we should do right now in the arena if we want to win, right? We should pick Paladin. So it's perfect. We are
also figuring out the weapon bonus during that
we
draft.
We so called that before it actually was confirmed for real.
That was pretty impressive.
It just made sense at that point.
Something's funny here. Wait a second.
We even went with it. We're like, no, we're not going to take a Vine Cleaver here because we're going to get one later. And we got 2 later or something ridiculous like that. I don't know. But check it out on our YouTube channel. You know, always fun to be playing with Isher. And yeah, so until next time, this is ADWCTA.
This is Merps. See you guys.
All right.